I'm going to follow the earlier speaker's cue and just kind of walk around a little bit. I get a little nervous if I have to stand behind this podium, and I doubt that anyone has any trouble hearing me. Is that fair to say? My wife says that I talk loud, and you'll have to excuse me. I have an infection in my right ear, so at least the right side is deaf, and but I'll try not to speak too loud. And if you can't hear me, just raise your hand. First, I want to thank the Cornbelt chapter, as well as Mark Avery and Grain Journal for asking me to be here today. When Mark contacted me, maybe a month or so ago, to come over and talk with this group, at first I was a little hesitant to say yes. Then I thought, well, it'd be a great opportunity. I get to see some old friends, people that I've known in the industry. I look around and there's so many friends and co-workers, and in some cases competitors that we've worked with and against over the years. And of all the things that John talked about in my bio, there's three things I'm most proud of. One is my family, of course. Two is having worked for one organization, I guess, that actually tolerated me for 43 years, right? That was probably a major hurdle in itself. And last but not least is my association with and working with the GEAPS organization over all these years. So congratulations to each one of you for participating in that. Great lunch, and it's really tough to talk after lunch. Everybody really wants to go to sleep. So if you nod off, I'll just assume it was because of the lunch and not because of my speech. But it was also hard. It's going to be hard to follow the earlier speaker today when we talk about this 2015 crop. I've titled my presentation, "Are You Prepared for the Crop?" Okay, it's not a real fancy name and nothing special to it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know about crop today. Okay, and you all have already heard more information than what I'll give you, but I have a little bit different slant on it. Then I'll spend more time as it relates to grain quality. And we'll talk about what can we do to get prepared for this year, some of the concerns, some of the things we might have to look at. And last but not least, kind of just a follow-up, what do we want to try to maybe look at, some suggestions on what you could do at harvest time, and finally take a look at what we could do post-harvest. So here again, lots of charts. You guys saw a lot of the information, but I think one thing that is interesting is that the crop does continue to improve week by week. When you take a look at, I have to make sure which button I'm pushing, but you just take a look at corn dented, August 9th, 17%. The week before it was only at 8, and the average of 24. So the crop is starting to catch up a little bit, okay? In my drive coming across this morning from central Indiana, I live north of Kokomo, drove down through Lafayette. I did a 75-mile-an-hour crop tour on I-74, and you might, but you really have some nice-looking crops in this area. There are areas that are challenged, but you do have some nice-looking crops. So the same thing with the soybean crop; it continues to improve as well. Last week's corn crop conditions, and I borrowed this I gave them acknowledgement from the Van Trump report. So, but if you just take a look at the area, and you heard it earlier from the earlier talk, here we are in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. This belt right in through here where we saw all the rain, you can see that crop conditions, and this was on 8/9, so just 3 days ago from this is the USDA NASS crop progress. Poor to very poor, 15% in Illinois, good to excellent, 56. Okay, so and you see about the same. I would have to agree. There's parts of Indiana that are hit much worse than I've seen around through here. Some of the crops that were planted early, corn in particular, some of those fields look just phenomenal. Big yields plus 200 bushel the acre, and then all came the rains. They weren't able to get into the fields, weren't able to get it planted. Some cases went back and replanted. Soybeans, I've seen soybeans that are standing this tall and beautiful and green, and other soybeans that are this tall, and you have to wonder if they'll ever even mature. before the first frost. So take a look at soybean conditions, much the same. So that same area, of course, hit by the rain. I think it's interesting, just look back on the corn here once. He was talking about the states in the southeast. The Georgia, the Carolinas in through here appear to be about a little bit above last year's averages, okay, as far as crop conditions. And then you move to the bean chart, and you can see from a bean perspective, they're definitely worse than they were, and this is just all compared to the 2014 crop, which we heard the earlier speaker tell us was a record, So this does not really do it justice. I was flying back from Canada actually about 10 days ago, and it's hard to see in this picture, and I put it in there and I thought, well, maybe it'd look better on a big screen. And it doesn't really look a lot better on a big screen. But you can just see all this variability in these cornfields, and that's what we're seeing in many, many cases all the way across, particularly through the eastern Corn Belt, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and even other places. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. That's actually just south of Indianapolis, but that's the one thing I think that we're dealing with across this entire area from just a crop condition standpoint. So what do we know today? First and foremost, we just really don't know that much about quality. I was reading an article the other day that was in a magazine from, I think, Charlie Herberg, Dirk Meyer, and Klein LJ had an article, and they were talking about grain quality and the crop and so forth. There's so much that we don't know yet about the crop quality. We know that there's certainly could be some concerns, some challenges, and we'll talk about those as well. But the book is really still open on the overall quality of the crop. Weather over the next few weeks can and will have a big impact. The soybean crop in particular has really started to come back around. I don't think the corn that we see out in the fields that's this tall and has tassels and little tiny ears, they're never coming back. That yield is gone. Maybe some of the healthy stalks will actually fill out and dent better, but the weather over the next few weeks will have an impact on that. It appears that some areas of the country, as we saw in the other charts, will have normal to better than normal yields. I mean, that's the way it's going to be. It looks like this year. I think we're going to have customers that are going to have fields that are going to have phenomenal yields, and maybe the field right next to it or within the same field. The yield monitor might go from 220 to 5 bushel the acre, in the very same field. And as I pointed out, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois crops are certainly at levels that appear to be less than last year. And this is the word that I've used and others have used very in this whole process. Highly variable are the key words in these crops. Highly variable not only from yield standpoint, but also, I believe, long-term from a quality standpoint in particular. So what are some of the potential concerns that we might have from I'm going to try to look at this more, not from a marketing standpoint, okay, but from an operational standpoint. You're operating your elevator. What are the things that you may want to think about, concerns that you may have as you get ready for this crop? This isn't to suggest you haven't done these things. I'm just going to kind of throw them up here in a wall, and hopefully if some of them stick and they help in that process, that'd be great. Plant diseases from the extremes of the weather. I'm not a forecaster of VOM and aflatoxin and all those kind of things out there, but there's certainly some diseases that could be present in the crop today. Lower yields for not only the producer but also the end user. One of the facilities that I helped manage a number of for years, a corn cleaning facility here in Illinois, they're nervous about the yield that's actually going to come off of and how good that kernel is actually going to be for food grade corn. Not just the bushels per acre, but also the actual quality of that as well. Large variability in maturity within the same field. from an operational perspective and a quality perspective, that probably scares me more than anything. It would be nice if, as the farmer was going through the field, and he would cut around those areas that are nice and green, but it's been my experience that many times that doesn't happen. And that's that load of soybeans that comes into the facility that's mostly dry, but then there's just full of green pods and stems and everything else. And of course, you can see the very same thing in the corn crop as well. So this maturity is, I think, will eventually play a big role. And I put this in the potential for wider than normal moisture swings in wet harvested crops, such as corn. I read an article many years ago, and I don't know who wrote it, was that if you were to take a well-developed ear of corn and shell the kernels off one at a time and run those through a single kernel moisture analyzer, you might see from one end of the tip end to the base end of the corn 2, 3, maybe 5% moisture difference in those kernels. Okay, even a small variation, you in a normal harvest, you see that out there. But when we now have these small plants that are going to have small kernels, maybe underdeveloped kernels, that variability, I think, there's the potential for these wider than normal swings in the moisture. Kernel size and quality could well be adversely affected, leading to excessive broken corn or foreign material. You know, these kernels that aren't developed, they run through the machine. If the guy running the combine doesn't get it there, when you bring it into the elevator and you handle it, there's a good chance that you could see more breakage because of the quality of that as well. Due to higher than normal moisture variability within the wet grain, the dry grain, that moisture coming out of the dryer, greater variability. You know, when you look at, and I'm not a scientist on this, but when I think about it, if I have a load of corn and within that mass of grain going into the dryer, there's some kernels that are 35% and some that are 25%, and you take that whole group down 10 points, you've taken the 35 to 25 and the 25 to 15. And if you open that spread up, okay, you now open yourself up for potential quality problems down the road with the storability of that crop. Okay. Variability in, supposed to be not he field, I guess that's what spell check does for you, doesn't it? But equals a greater variability in the samples collected from the trucks. This is one of the things I think at your facility to take a look at in your processes, to see how good of a job are your folks doing as they're sampling the trucks. You know, as they're getting that sample out of the truck, how representative of it, how representative is that sample of that load that's coming in the door? Because that's really the point at which you establish that benchmark of what the quality is on that corn, what you're going to do with it. Are you going to run it through the dryer? Are you going to put it in a, maybe put it in a bin that you're going to just put the air on and treat as semi-wet corn, okay? But if you don't have a good sample to start with, you eventually, all your results from there on could be somewhat clouded. So, and you know, this one, as an operations guy, I used to see a lot of this. Maybe this doesn't happen in Illinois, but it happens in Indiana, where someone has some carryover stocks. I mean, he showed us where there's, what, 1.7 billion bushels of corn being carried over. I would hazard to guess there's at least 100,000 bushels that's damaged, right? Well, that's going to somehow, people are going to want to rotate their stocks. They want to move that grain, okay? So though that I think is could be a concern this year as that carryover gets bigger. There tends to be you know, maybe this is an overstatement, but there seems to be more damage that's around because you're carrying it over. Maybe the crop wasn't conditioned from the prior year, whatever. So you may see that coming into your facilities as well. When approaching challenges, I just like to think about it like this, and this is the best way is to prepare for the worst and hope and pray for the best. I used to, the operations guys that reported to me for a number of years, I would basically tell them this very same thing, maybe in a little bit different flavor, okay? But basically you want to think of what's the worst case that could happen to you at the facility, as it relates to quality and quantity coming in, and then try to plan around that on what you can do to mitigate those circumstances and keep your operation going to service the customer and to accomplish what you want to accomplish at your facility. And of course, preparation really is central and is key to the whole thing. So I'm going to jump now to some, after I get a sip of water here, excuse me. So what can you do from a preparation standpoint? What are the things that you might be able to do at your facility to get prepared for the 2015 crop? And these are some of the very same things that you would do for any crop, any year, but maybe with some additional attention paid to the quality side because of this the variability in this crop. Review prior harvest issues and figure out ways to alleviate or reduce bottlenecks. You know, I'm sure you go through those processes. I used to, with my staff, we would sit down annually, maybe not quite this late in the process, maybe like around June or so, and say, you know, what did we do last year that was really good? What did we do that wasn't so good, kind of bad, and what did we do that was just plain ugly? You know, what did we do from a service standpoint? You know, how did we service the customer? What happened from a quality standpoint? The decisions that we made on binning and how we were going to actually operate the facility. So I think those, I would suggest that that's a good process to go through with your key members of your staff. I'm sure you guys do that. It's one of those things that I think can, in that environment, you can bring those things to the surface, and maybe that helps you develop a process or a plan to correct those things in future through improvements, and new machinery, whatever that might be. Have a pre-harvest meeting with all your employees. That's not a very good color, but all the employees. And I was guilty of this for a number of years, is that when we got ready to get ready for harvest, we'd have to go out and hire seasonals. Everybody in here hire seasonal labor, part-time labor to help you through harvest, I would assume. Well, many times we would put those people on the probe. Or we would put those people helping at the truck dump. Or, you know, you put them in those places, and really those are sometimes the first contact that customer has, particularly the person at the probe, might be the first contact that customer has with your company. So, you know, you want to get them involved in the process and get them thinking about what is the plan, what are you going to do, and how are you going to manage through this harvest. It's also a great opportunity to get everyone together and to start that process of your safety training and all the other things that you have to do in getting your folks ready. So I just threw that mold testing. You know, that's one of the things that many years ago we didn't test for aflatoxin. Well, at a lot of terminals you didn't. I know end users, they've been doing that for a long time, okay? But now it's becoming more of a standard. You'll see contracts that come out, you know, guaranteed less than 20 ppb for aflatoxin, or less than 3 or 2.0 for vomitoxin. So being prepared for that, having your kits on hand and having your people trained, wow, that's a big piece. So more suggestions, start at the beginning, take a look at your inspection equipment and the processes. Just make sure the equipment is calibrated and in good working condition. Oh, that's, excuse me. Review with key personnel some of the potential challenges and how you and your organization plan to handle those issues. I thought it was one of the toughest things as an operations supervisor or manager to be sitting in your office and there's a truck sitting out there in your driveway that you just probed that has some quality issue, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to handle that. Now, granted, you may not be able to come up with a solution to 100% of the things that will come in the door, but if you've been around for a while, you'll have these odd things that happen that come into your facility. You just want to have a process there to handle those. And I think as important as any of those were, and they're all important, get a solid understanding of what the sell side expectations are. What does your customer expect? what is your sell side? Well, how are you going to have to merchandise this crop? You know, if you need to know how you're going to merchandise the crop to allow you to know how you're going to maybe bend the grain as it comes in, particularly if you have a challenge with off-quality grain. I'm not suggesting that this crop will necessarily be, you know, all off quality. I don't think that's that at all. I think there'll be some that'll have some significant challenges, and those will be the ones that we're going to have to deal with from an operational perspective. More ideas and suggestions. Develop a workable bending plan. Takes into consideration, you know, large variability in grade. That's all facility specific. You may only have, you know, 3 big 750,000 bushel bends. Well, it's pretty hard to IP. You know, you just can't identity preserve in there. It just goes in the bin and it all gets mixed together, right? That's when house averages really don't mean anything anymore. I put this in. This happens. It happened to us many times where we would, early in harvest, there'd be premiums for, you know, garnering some wet corn to blend off with that damage that you maybe carried over from your pile from last year. Not that anybody in Illinois would ever have any damage from the pile. We're only in Indiana, right? I know it's only in Indiana. But maybe it was only at the places that I managed. I got to think about that once. But nonetheless, there was always a premium, you know. Well, let's go out and get some of this new crop corn to get it through the dryer. Well, stuff was 30, 35, 40% moisture, you know. You try to slug that through your dryer. I don't care how big of a dryer you have. I don't know if see any dryer guys in here, do it. But, you know, 10,000 bushel an hour dryer, you know, and trying to take out 15 points runs pretty slow, you know. So, anyways, might want to consider that if you have the space. So, I know our next speaker is going to talk about dryer preparation, so I'm going to skip that. See where I even wrote in there, skip it. Not going to step on that. But I will talk about some dryer operation guidelines that you may want to, you know, consider as you're looking at this upcoming crop, particularly if the crop is already quality challenged. In other words, the starch or the pericarp might be, you know, too soft or brittle or whatever that might be. These, can you see that? I can't see it very well. Maybe it's just me. So this is just kernel temperature. I have another slide that shows, you know, plenum temperature, which we generally think about when we're running the dryer, right? This is internal kernel temperature under 100 for seed, 100 to 120 for human food, 120 to 140 animal. This is kind of where we bounce around in. From 140 to 160, moderate damage and test weight losses. You know, you guys have probably seen that, right? I know I certainly have. Whoops, sorry. And last but not least, over 160, severe damage, you know, test weight, all that kinds of stuff. And here is what we're probably more used to looking at. These are plenum temperatures, the temperatures within the plenum of the dryer, okay? I'm not smart enough to correlate the 200 to the 140. You guys can do that. But, you know, if you just take a look at corn here for almost any kind of dryer, continuous flow, recirculating batch, column, except for, you can kind of see here, they're 200 degrees. That's about the max on any grain that you see there. I'd be the first to hold my hand up that said I haven't set it at 210. Okay. Anybody ever go higher than 210? I won't tell anybody. Okay. I've been at 220. And then, you know, then I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Bring her back down. You know, everything has to be working right. But at those kind of temperatures, you really stress crack the corn. If it's particularly wet, you know, what you're going to pay long term is a real penalty. You know, you're going to end up having tons of screenings that you're going to have to deal with. And when you're running that corn from the dryer into your bins, you're going to have more that you're going to have to deal with from cleaning and coring and so forth, which is a major quality thing to consider. So that's the only thing I'm really going to talk about, operation of dryers, and I'll let our next speaker, the expert, take care of the rest of that. So I put in just some things, basic, kind of simple things, dump and receiving systems, you know, checking your dust collection, vehicle scales inspected and calibrated prior to harvest. I know in the state of Indiana, we're required once a year to do scale inspections. We got in the habit of doing it 4 times a year, okay? Plus the 1 time for the state. Always had them once before wheat harvest and once before fall harvest, you know. That's a big chunk of, your scale's off just a little bit, it could cost you a lot of money, and you won't know it until the next spring when you do your inventory and you say, oh, I wonder what happened to all that grain. It's gone. Or if your customers start complaining. But gates and valves check, this is one of my pets. You know, you're middle of harvest, you're running to a corn pile, you're running across your wheat tanks, going out to the corn pile, right? And then your guy comes, you get to the month end, you go up to take soundings, you ever have him go up and open the door and there's corn on top of the wheat? I mean, you know, it's just because the gate wasn't closed all the way. So just little things. You'll have to excuse me for my divergence on that. Distributors and gates, certainly, you know. Limit switches, of course, as well. Splices on your legs and conveyors. They always they only break when you're using them really hard. You know, when you're running that leg at 110% load, that's when the splice pulls apart, right? Same thing with your conveyors. So, storage systems, make sure your fans are operational, ductwork cleaned and sealed, temperature cables operational. For those of us that have temperature cables where we don't have, how are you going to get those cables pulled up and get them out of the way, you know? We actually had gone and put the access ports on top of the bin roof, so you could actually reach in there once the bin was empty, and you could pull the cable up and get it out of the way for that filling season. So, sweeps serviced in proper operation. Temp cables tied down, I also put in here per bin manufacturer recommendations. I won't even get in, I won't touch that with that, but I know we had a policy that the cables had to be all tied vertical and tied well, so that we had a case at a couple of facilities where they tied them together in a big daisy chain, and what happened is they all shifted to one side, and then we pulled in a roof on a tank. So, and it was determined it was from the temperature cables, you know, being pulled off to the side, and so that's just something to put in your bucket. Same thing on temporary piles. According to the earlier slides today, we probably won't need them because we're going to have, 258 million bushels of excess capacity here in Illinois. But in Indiana, even with that much capacity, I guarantee you they'll use the piles. So, insect pre-treating, fans checked for proper rotation, of course. Retaining walls inspected for integrity. Action items during harvest. Core or harch your storage structures as soon as possible to reduce fines and improve aeration. I know you've read articles. I've wrote articles and they've been posted out there. You think about the process of coring. If it isn't part of your process today, you want to get there, okay, as much as possible. For lots of reasons, which we'll touch base on shortly. Cool as soon as practical. Dry to acceptable storage levels as soon as possible. You can see all of these are talking about doing it as soon as possible because of how quickly the grain can actually deteriorate. And I put this in, if possible, clean prior to storage, especially piles and temporary structures that tend to be challenged with your ability to maintain qualities in the first place. Last but not least, all these above here can positively impact quality, and in their absence, it can have a negative impact on the quality as well. So why is coring so important? You've probably seen these. This is a slide that I borrowed from Klein LJ at Purdue University, but you know, you just look at this fines line, and the larger the bin, the greater that fines line will get. We actually had procedures that on tanks over 500,000 bushels, we would core them twice during the filling stage to try to get as many fines out. I've had people ask me, well, how much do you need to core out of here? How big is this? I've seen some charts that show 1/3 the diameter. This core here should be across there 1/3 the diameter, or half the diameter. What I would suggest from an operational perspective is I'd check your samples. And when your samples get to where they're coming out of the center and they're fairly clean, then I'd stop the coring process and restart refilling again. So 3 big C's, where the big C's, coring, Y, improves airflow, reduce the potential for insect activity, could actually increase capacity in extreme cases. I've seen some bends so dirty that they steep, pile so steep that you're down on the sidewall 6 feet, when normally if it was cleaned you would be almost at the sidewall. So if you don't core those fines out, you just get a big tall stack in the middle, and you actually lose some capacity. My favorite is, I won't say my favorite, reduces the potential to go inside to unplug the center hole. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that in the industry we can do is to core bends. It'll keep people from having to go inside there, because that's usually what plugs off is that center hole. And the reason is because it more than likely hasn't been cored. Cooling extends the shelf life, reduces and retards insect activity, slows or retards mold growth, and it can even drop moisture content if designed and used properly. Use aeration, dry aeration. I want to skip through that, but this is more my favorite one. How long before properly conditioned? This is a chart that's been out there for quite some time, and maybe others have seen about it, but corn moisture across the top here, bean moisture across the bottom, and then you interject the temperatures. So if you take 24% moisture corn at 80 degrees, that 0.06 works out to about less than 2 days. Sorry, I don't mean to be in front of you, Rick. And this is based upon the loss of one grade factor, 2 to 3% in damage, something like that. So the longer it sets at high moistures, higher elevated temperatures, you have increased damage, mold growth, insect activity, and that I think the important thing to remember is that anytime you lose that kind of storability, you damage it up early in front in the crop, you're taking away from the long-term storability of it down the road. You decrease the actual storage time. So post-harvest activities. Need to watch my time here. Monitor temperatures and exhausts of fans. These are all things that I'm sure you already have long had on your list. Consider using CO2 monitoring as a quality tool, either in conjunction with temperature cables or alone if you don't have temperature cables. Many of you in the room have heard me talk about CO2 monitoring. I don't know if I'll call myself a fan, but I'm a believer that it has a place in our toolbox. It is not perfect, it is not exact, but it is better than seeing if the snow's melting off the roof of the bin, right? It's one step closer. So, but you may want to consider that. Particularly there's lots of options out there today from folks you might want to look at. Transfer and sample, of course, to check quality. So rotate the stocks when and where possible. So just in wrap up, I want to continue to monitor local crop conditions closely. In your backyard, you might have the best crops available. 5 miles down the road, 40 miles down the road, in Indiana, my backyard, I know that's not going to be true there. Get prepared with your facility and a plan to handle the worst case. Variability has the potential to be big this year, so keep your eyes and ears open. Cool, condition, dry, and core as soon as possible. This year in particular, because of the potential for quality issues of the crop as it comes in the door in particular. Monitor, and last but not least, I don't speak about it in any other time, there's nothing more important than your safety and that of your coworkers, so keep that safety right up front with you all the time. And that's it. Any questions? Comments? Yes, Jim?
I agree with your emphasis on corn, and that's going to be my trip. Have you had any experience with the spreaders that are out on the market like this?
Yes. We installed some spreaders in a couple of 95-foot diameter bends. Compared to what we had before, the results were positive, okay? We didn't have near the coring issue, you know, but one of the things that we had on that bin in particular is that with that particular manufacturer, we had to disconnect some of the temperature cables to allow the whole unit to turn, and they didn't get that done. And so what happened is the whole unit started to turn, and then that was it. You know, so we had these smaller peaks around the bin, but in total, we had a positive experience with it, Jim. You, anyone else tried the spreaders? I know they're making them now, I've heard up to 40,000 bushel or bigger an hour.
I know I talked to some individuals that have been 90, and they put in 75 corn, didn't pour anything, and they loaded straight out of them, they sprayed on in the
Yeah. Well, at the facility I'm referencing, we always struggled to try to get it cored, you know, get it cleaned enough, because it seemed like stuff was just handled so many times. It made a phenomenal difference. I mean, we were missing grade years before when we were pulling out of that bin, you know, to load trains, and they didn't have that problem. So, and they did, by the way, this year pulled up the extra cable, so the whole unit will now spin in there. So, no one else have any experience with the spreaders? If there's nothing else, I'm done. Thank you.